The beginning of the year gave rise to conversations when and what kind of weapons should Ukraine expect in 2023. Ukraine has already received HIMARS and several IRIS-T air defense systems. Then came Washington's promise to supply the Patriot air defense complex, but this is not all that is in the arms request of Kyiv. What equipment is critically needed by Ukraine for the counteroffensive? Are there any approximate dates for new deliveries? And what can they change at the front line? I'm Oleksii Matsuka, and in this issue I will try to answer all these questions in detail. We talked about the Patriot air defense in detail on the same day that the White House gave permission to transfer them to Ukraine. However, both the Pentagon and the US Department of State constantly emphasized that these are defensive weapons.
These are air defense systems, and that means weapons with defensive capabilities. We provide assistance to Ukraine in the field of security, what is needed each time depending on the situation, and this also applies to such a solution. Vedant Patel, Principal Deputy Spokesperson of the US Department of State.
So, it's worth talking about offensive weapons. According to Politico, during a visit to Washington, the Ukrainian delegation will discuss the supply of ATACMS missiles as well as Grey Eagle and Reaper drones. Both models are some of the best strike drones in the world. With their help, Ukraine could deliver high-precision strikes deep behind Russian lines. But there are fears, and they were voiced, that if such a drone is shot down or worse, intercepted, Moscow could get important technologies. They even discussed the option to play it safe and transfer the modified version of the Grey Eagle to the armed forces of Ukraine without some sensitive technical components. However, apparently this decision has not yet been made. Nevertheless, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, many contracts concluded for the supply of other necessary weapons and ammunition for 2023, which will be received throughout the year.
The American military-industrial complex is already working. That is, one of the key topics of each Ramstein meeting is the launch of the production capacities of the countries that support Ukraine in this war. To date, orders have already taken place, and not only in the USA, but also in Germany, France, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Romania and other countries. Oleksii Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine.
Now as to ATACMS. It's a tactical ground-to-ground ballistic missile that can be used on HIMARS systems, providing a maximum range up to, imagine, 300 kilometers. The missiles that were previously handed over to the armed forces of Ukraine were mainly delivered only for 80 tons. Get them to Kyiv, this would expand Ukraine's ability to strike at airfields with Russian attack aircraft and even ballistic and cruise missile launch areas. And yet, it would instantly jeopardize the Russian military bases in the Crimea and the Black Sea fleet, which they use to hit Ukrainian infrastructure.
We will be able to destroy enemy forces, warehouses and command posts within a radius of 300 kilometers in a sufficiently deep area. We must destroy first of all the launch sites of missiles or drones with such long-range missiles. It will shift the balance. Yegor Chernov, member of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on National Security, Defense and Intelligence.
However, according to Politico, the White House is not yet ready to provide that kind of weapons to Ukraine. The reason is probably the same reason why the West was in no hurry with the supply of all previous types of weapons. They say that these missiles could potentially be used on the territory of Russia and thereby provoke the Kremlin to further escalate and use tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine. It's likely that Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation raised this issue during their visit to Washington, but apparently they have not yet succeeded in convincing Joe Biden. At the press conference following the talks, ATACMS was not even mentioned, and after a specific question from journalists, Joe Biden began to explain. He said, "We are transferring the weapon that is needed now for now."
You say, why don't we just give Ukraine everything there is to give? Well, for two reasons. One, there's an entire alliance that is critical to stay with Ukraine. And the idea that we would give Ukraine material that is fundamentally different than is already going there would have a prospect of breaking up NATO and breaking up the European Union and the rest of the world. We're going to give Ukraine what it needs to be able to defend itself, to be able to succeed and succeed in the battlefield. And the other piece of this is, you may recall, one of the reasons why I have spent, well, I won't tell you the calculation, but I've spent several hundred hours face-to-face with our European allies and the heads of state of those countries, and making the case as to why it was overwhelming in their interest that they continue to support Ukraine. They understand it fully, but they're not looking to go to war with Russia. They're not looking for a third world war, and I think it can all be avoided by making sure that Ukraine is able to succeed in the battlefield.
That is, if we draw a conclusion from these words, the question is still in the position of Europe, which is increasingly criticized. For example, the same Boris Johnson, after retiring, he dramatically changed the tone in relation to former colleagues and their concerns.
I am aware of the boring counter-argument that increased supplies to Ukraine could lead to an escalation, like we don't dare to risk pushing the Russian bear. But after a year of this disgusting conflict, we see that this is complete nonsense. Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Is there a chance for Ukraine to get ATACMS in the near future? According to the Times sources, there is an urgent request in the United States that Western weapons are not used against civilian objects of the Russian Federation and that the laws of war are not violated. And if such a promise is given, and the Europeans given, this year I don't rule out Kyiv could also replenish its arsenals with long-range missiles. Patriots, after all, were also asked for a very long time until Washington changed its mind. About what the armed forces of Ukraine need for a counteroffensive in 2023, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, spoke in detail in an interview with The Economist. Moreover, he, for the first time, so frankly, called not only the types of weapons, but also the quantity.
I know that I can beat this enemy, but I need resources. I need 300 tanks, from 600 to 700 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 howitzers. Then I think it is completely realistic to get to the lines of February the 23rd, but I can't do it with 2 brigades. I get what I get, but it is less than what I need. Valery Zaluzhny, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Today, the Ukrainian army mainly uses old Soviet equipment, moreover from the United Kingdom, from a retired military man and a professor at the University of Portsmouth, Mr. Frank Ledwidge. An assessment was made publicly that more than half of the tanks that the Ukrainian military has at their disposal are what they managed to capture from the Russian army. These data were unofficially confirmed to us in Washington, and Ukraine has repeatedly asked to give her the best armor.
Our most pressing need now is modern tanks. Tanks are needed to break through those very concrete fortifications. Not those that are being built in the Bryansk region, but those that are located in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, in the Kherson region. These are armored pillboxes. These are strongholds. Specifically, in order to break through them, we need modern tanks of the Abrams format, the Leopard format. Pavlo Narozhny, military expert.
Abrams is an American tank of the third generation. The model is not very new, but it was used in all military operations in which the American Army took part since the 19th. Compared to the Soviet T-72, they have better firepower and armor, which means they will have an advantage in combat with Russian equipment.
The American M1 Abrams tanks are battle-tested vehicles that are still a generation ahead of anything in the Russian arsenal. There are about 3,000 of these tanks in US storage facilities, and Ukraine needs less than 1,000 to provide new brigades. The same can be said about 2,000 Bradley armored personnel carriers that could protect Ukrainian infantrymen. Europe can provide excellent NATO standard equipment, including tanks, but it won't. Frank Ledwidge, professor at the University of Portsmouth, retired military.
What is the difficulty with tanks? First, logistics. In order for these tanks to fully function in Ukraine, it's necessary to create a repair base for them, and this takes time. Even the idea of using workshops in Poland was discussed, which signed a contract for the supply of more than 200 of these tanks, and will obviously be repairing its armed vehicles. But maintenance is one thing, and repair after the battle is another. And the damaged vehicle will have to be delivered there somewhere. But even despite this, Abrams remains in the Ukrainian request for this year.
If, for example, they told me that I could choose either a few dozen ATACMS or 100 Abrams tanks, I would of course choose 100 Abrams tanks. Yigal Levin, military expert.
In turn, the United States is stepping up efforts to pursue European countries to transfer their armed vehicles to Ukraine. First of all, this concerns the German Leopard 2 tanks, which may become the first non-Soviet-made tanks in the arsenal of the armed forces of Ukraine. Experience shows that Berlin, as far as arms supplies are concerned, has been swinging for a very long time.
I told them. In fact, Germany has already taken the lead, for example, in the supply of the Iris-T air defense system. This is the first air defense system that was delivered to Ukraine. Similarly, the Gepard, which successfully shoots down Iranian drones, are also the first deliveries of Germany specifically, to help us gradually close the sky from missiles. There is no reason not to do this with tanks. Germany can take the lead when it wants to. Oleksii Matsuka, ambassador of Ukraine to Germany.
The German government in turn names various reasons why Leopards are not supplied to Ukraine. They also speak publicly about the fear of bringing the situation to a state of war between Russia and NATO, and about taking into account the opinion of citizens who don't agree with the policy of sanctions and the supply of weapons. It's very likely that Berlin will still take a wait-and-see position on this issue, and as soon as one of the Western partners takes the initiative, only then will it begin to act. Ukraine has been voicing a request for modern fighter aircraft no less than for long-range weapons and tanks. First of all, this would expand the capabilities of air defense. Yes, Patriot will be delivered to Ukraine. Kyiv is already using the NASAMS and German Iris-T. However, there are still too few. The efficiency factor of 76%, which the Ukrainian military command speaks about, is provided largely thanks to the old S-300 systems and Soviet Su-27 and MiG-29 fighters. And switching over to Western aircraft in the next year or two is a strategic task that Kyiv is now formulating for itself and, of course, for the partners. In this context, the American F-16 is most often mentioned. which is the main model for many armies in NATO. However, they require serious maintenance and may not be suitable for Ukrainian air bases. The air intake of these fighters is located below, which means that they are very demanding on the coverage of airfields, experts say.
Our airfields are made of slabs, there are joints, and taking into account the fact that strikes are being made, there are peeling stones. When the plane accelerates, then all this will fall into this air intake and disable the engine, which is only one. Igor Romanenko, retired Lieutenant General of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, military expert.
The Air Force Command claims that it's already working on adapting and updating the infrastructure. At the same time, part of the infrastructure nuances will make it possible to remove the F-15 Eagle fighter bombers. They are not so picky about coverage. They have 2 engines each, a larger combat radius and speed, and they can carry more weapons. But here the nuance may lie in the price of this issue. The cost of a flight hour for the F-16 is about $8,000. Obviously, the F-15 has it even higher. The Swedish Saab Gripen looks twice as economical as a fighter, which was also designed by the Swedes to work in difficult conditions and can take off even from a highway.
In terms of operation, the plane is perfect. There's up to $5,000 a flight hour in the air. Features close to the MiG-29 and F-16, but this is a plane that costs more than F-16. There are certain nuances here. It should be borne in mind that you cannot come to any aviation supermarket and buy as much as you need. Viktor Kivlyuk, expert at the Center for Defense Strategies.
But much depends on the volume of production. And since there are still the most F-16 fighters in the world, the chance of getting them from Ukraine are still more real.
Strengthening the Ukrainian Armed Forces with F-16s, F-15s, or possibly Swedish Gripen or other systems is a matter of time. These are complex systems that require maintenance, training and maintenance. Therefore, our partners technically and logistically build their ability to support us systematically. Oleksii Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine.
About the planes, again, there are fears of a possible escalation. But if you look back, you can see how the West is gradually pushing the boundaries of support for Ukraine. And what was not even discussed some time ago is already being loaded on board military transport aircraft to be delivered to Poland and from there to Ukraine. Before the Russian invasion, the armed forces of Ukraine received only light anti-tank weapons, manned portable air defense system, and small arms from the Allies. They were afraid of the reaction of the Kremlin. Since the end of spring, the armed forces of Ukraine began to receive modern types of artillery. No escalation has occurred. Even at the beginning of the war, the United States stated that the supply of Patriot systems to Ukraine was categorically impossible, and now they are going to be delivered to Ukraine.
Trust me, very soon we will have the Patriot systems and Abrams tanks, and Leopard tanks and everything else. Such is the objective development of this war. It will all be on our territory, in the use of the armed forces of Ukraine. Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine.
So it's quite likely that over time the West will decide and give Ukraine long-range weapons, tanks and everything else that will be necessary for the faster end of the war. And the calculation is largely for the coming year 2023. But when this weapon arrives, where exactly will Ukraine concentrate its effort during the counterattacks? And what else are the armed forces of Ukraine still lacking on the battlefield to drive the occupiers out of the borders of Ukraine. We will talk about this in the new videos. Thanks for watching and see you soon.